Hey, CNFers, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast is brought to you by me. What? That's right. You've heard me say that if you want to get in better shape, you hire a personal trainer. Yeah, she knows the basics, can watch that deadlift form, but she's mainly there to tell you where to put the tired and to hold you accountable in your journey. That's where I come in, to objectively read your work, find ways to make it stronger, and coach you along. Personalized. Every writer is different. There's no cookie cutter approach. Sessions include a personalized questionnaire, several reads with detailed notes, and an in-depth critique, as well as Skype calls with me. So if you're ready to level up, I'd be honored to serve you in your work.
You don't become a writer and then write a novel. You become a writer by writing.
Well, all right, CNFers, you know what this is. This is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I talk to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara. Hey, welcome. I'll come right out and say it. I think I must have forgotten, to link up my microphone to Zencastr, which is what I've been using of late to record the conversations. So my audio, what's supposed to be so clean and crisp, is actually pretty echoey because my voice wasn't getting picked up in my good mic. It was getting picked up in the built-in laptop microphone, which was, a foot or two away from me instead of this beautiful thing I speak into now. So that happened. So I really apologize for that. I hope it doesn't distract you too much. You'd think after 212 of these, I'd have safeguards in place. Nope, still a moron. My guest is Kevin Guilfoile, and he's the author of the memoir, A Drive into the Gap. It is published by Field Notes, which is super cool. It's a story about stories, fathers and sons, and a mystery to find out the true identity of Roberto Clemente's bat that registered his 3,000th and final career hit. Kevin has also written novels and a movie, so he plays in different sandboxes. Jesus. I don't know, guys. This could be it. This could be the end. He plays in different sandboxes, you dig? Good Lord. Keep the conversation going on social media at CNFPod, wherever you hang out. I've been deleting all my tweets on my Brendan O'Mara Twitter feed because it's my great goal to vanish and disappear and live a life like Ferdinand the Bull. Then my friend Ruby McConnell of episode 202 fame said I should make an essay out of the deleted tweets. I deleted some doozies, but there's many more, and it'll make for a good essay to write to avoid doing the things I should be doing, of course. The great lesson? I'm not funny and I'm not clever, and all these tweets are just some pathetic, sad grab for attention. Truly, truly pathetic. Lastly, if you head over to BrendanO'Mara.com, hey, you'll find show notes to this episode and others, and can subscribe to my monthly newsletter where I give out reading recs, podcast news, writing tips, and I raffle off books. That's right. If you're on the email list and you don't unsubscribe, which I take super personally, you're entered in raffles to win books. And if you're feeling kind, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, screenshot that, send it to me, and I'll grant an hour of coaching. So think about 1,000, 1,500 words-ish. Just try to honor that. Once I see that screenshot, I'll reach back out and we'll get started. Not too shabby, right? I'm keeping this relatively short today because, just because. Once again, I'm apologizing for the audio. My end. Kevin sounds great. It's embarrassing. And I'll go into a shame spiral and won't pull the nose up until I'm deathly close to the earth. Today's show is also sponsored by Casualty of Words, my writing podcast for people in a hurry. It's a daily show that is often under 2 minutes long. So go on, become another casualty of words. All right, let's do this. Let's do this thing. Let's welcome Kevin Guilfoile. Woo! Writing and the practice of writing, it's for those of us who are really in the thick of it, we know it's not as romantic as Instagram might make it out to be. So so how have you cultivated a practice and a discipline in your writing, whether it's the novels you write or something that you really something that's more personal and close to the heart, as A Drive into the Gap is?
Every project I've undertaken, I've had to sort of learn how to do it over again, just because I'm in a different stage of my life. I wrote my first novel before I had kids. Um, I'd actually written a novel, just nights and weekends. I was working at an ad agency. Actually, the ad agency Kudal Partners that eventually became Field Notes. Um,
Mm,
but I was working at an ad agency and working on the novel, nights and weekends, and it took me 2 years. And I was when I finished, I realized it was terrible. So I literally threw it in a drawer, started a new one the next day.
yep.
Took me another 2 years, and I finished that novel just before my first son was born, and sold it rather quickly. And so and this was at a time when the ad agency was uh, sort of transitioning out of advertising and into the retail company that would become Field Notes, and so they didn't really need a copywriter anymore. And so I sold my first novel just as my first son was being born. So I just quit to be home with him and write full time. But now that became a whole new routine, because now I don't have another job, but I have this baby I'm taking care of.
Mm.
And So that was, I thought this is going to be a snap. I'm going to knock this novel out in like 6 months or whatever. No, it took me another 2 years, because I was busier than ever, raising this child. Um, and so uh, then that novel came out in, I guess that was 2010, and then I started a number of other projects kind of in succession, and Drive into the Gap was one of them. But again, every single project had its own challenges, and just because my life was in a different place, completely different routines.
Right. And I love in an interview I read that you did early 2000s, I think. You said, before I sat down and wrote that novel, and that might even been your first published novel, not the one you threw in the drawer. You
Right.
said, I always thought that novelists were other people. I didn't know what it was they had, but I figured it was something I didn't have. So how did you, get over that and build the muscle of creativity and the muscle of writing to overcome that mindset?
you know it's it's just, I guess I always thought there was some that the novel was just something I didn't know how to do, but I didn't realize that everybody teaches themselves how to do it. Like, right, there is no secret, there is no, and everybody does it a different way, and everybody is self-taught. Right, I mean,
Yeah.
you can go and take creative writing classes, and you go to workshops, and you can learn tricks of craft, but and good practices and those kinds of things. But everybody's got to figure out their own way through it. It's such a massive personal undertaking. There's really no way anybody can help you with it. It's the loneliest kind of project that you can undertake, and you just need to muscle through it and figure out your own way. And so, well, I guess what I meant when I said that was that was the big revelation I had when I was writing it. You don't become a writer and then write a novel. You become a writer by writing. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it sounds obvious when you say that, but it's really not obvious when you're trying to undertake a task like that, like writing a novel for the first time. You're always going to, when you start, feel like, I don't have any idea how to do this.
Right, and in the people that we see in lights, and even not in lights, just the fact that they have something between two hardcovers or paperback, it in some ways, especially as you're just getting started, it might feel that they have been anointed somehow, and it just appeared on the shelves, and it just appeared fully formed out of their heads because all that work and the grinding and the dozens of drafts that go into it and the repetition, it's not immediately apparent as why would it be, but it does just feel like it comes out fully formed. And then when you sit down in your chair and you realize how hard it is to put something coherent together, it just it can be really dispiriting.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. It is constant, almost constant despair with
Right.
little moments of revelation and ecstasy, like sort of sprinkled in. But it's the joys of it are kind of like gambling. It's just complete intermittent gratification,
Right.
with long stretches of failure in between.
Yeah, and ultimately the house wins somehow and just
That's right.
bludgeons you.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I also like how you said that, and you're alluding to it throughout this early part here, that there's nothing magical about it. It's just a matter of
Yeah.
sitting with it, doing the hard work, and of course, as I heard you say one time, there's some luck involved. So, but the harder you work, sometimes the more luck comes your way, right?
Oh, for sure. The the luck part of it is more is a lot of that is really what I was talking about, the publishing end of it, where
Hmm.
a lot of things have to align um, for your book to get published, right? You have to find an agent who, I mean, the rules have changed a little bit now because there's a lot of people. I'm not talking about people who, there's self-publishing and vanity publishing and those kinds of things. But if you're talking about the traditional publishing route, you need to find an agent who really understands you and is passionate about is as passionate about your book as you are, and then he's got to find an editor who is as passionate about your book as you are. That editor has to convince, um, a board of a committee of people who are going to release the money from the publisher to purchase to buy your book, that they should be as passionate about this novel as you are, and all of those things are outside your control, right? So, you hear so often about books that are now considered masterpieces that were uh, rejected. Let's say Confederacy of Dunces as an example, just rejected time and time and time again before they finally, you know, uh, found the right person who was able to give it to the right person who was able to give it to the right person, and that happens 1,000 times. The rejection end of that happens 1,000 times a day to writers all over the world, right? And the I was very, very lucky that I was able to have all those stars aligned with my first book. It just that I have no. I'm very proud of the novels I've written. I'm very proud of my first novel, but there are a lot of very, very there are a lot of excellent novels that didn't get the breaks that mine did, and I I understand that, and I am grateful for it.
Hmm. I wonder if maybe you can talk about how important reading the correspondence between Shelby Foote and Percy were to your sort of development as a writer.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I was a big Walker Percy fan. This is in the as I like started. I guess I started reading him in college and then in the years after. And I found that book at Faulkner House in New Orleans, a great bookstore in New Orleans, and read it on a vacation I was taking down there, and I was just enthralled by it. There, just the is I hadn't published a novel yet. I was I'd done some. I'm trying to remember exactly when this would have been, but I'd done a little bit of freelancing at this point. But I was mostly in advertising, as a creative director at an ad agency who one day wanted to write a novel, and to see to read these guys talk about writing as a passion, but also as a vocation, at the same time. People, these two guys who had been friends their whole lives, was just really, really inspiring me and really opened up. And it also revealed them as sort of ordinary people in a way, like we were saying before, that that they understood that writing is just hard work, right? And that all of that was kind of a revelation to me reading that novel. And it's also full of like I had never really thought about writing as a philosophy or philosophies of writing, and they had two very kind of different approaches to what they were doing, and it was and that enabled me to start thinking about writing in a completely different way. So it was inspiring that way too.
What I especially like about everything you're saying with respect to that is that what underscores this is doing or finding books as mentors and almost going through your own MFA program, if you will. Like you just find books that you admire and you try to imitate them as best you can. And through the repetition of it, your own voice will come out.
Right.
And that's the way you do this. I think there's an agency there where you can just say, these are the writers I admire, and I'm going to try and do my best to try to throw my hat into that ring and not think that, okay, if I get this next degree, then I'm a writer. It's just like, no, it's like read these things that I enjoy, fill up on that and then just try to do it yourself. And then through that messy repetition, eventually you get better.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I also think that for me anyway, as a person who primarily has published fiction, um, the I when I was in college, I mostly studied. I was basically a journalism major, and so I mostly studied nonfiction writing in college. I took from that the more the idea of as I was talking about, sort of writing as a vocation. That the discipline of nonfiction writing, where uh, your goals are to be clear, um, your goals are to really think about the reader, and your goal is to get a paycheck too, right? And
Right.
and I think I think really, whenever I am talking to other fiction writers, I'm running workshops with even fiction workshops. I lean on nonfiction source, like On Writing Well is, I think, the greatest book written about writing, by William Zinsser. I think it's the greatest book written about writing that there ever was. And I think, even though it's all about nonfiction writing, every fiction author should read that book, because it will just clarify. The fiction canvas is so large that I think that when you start to employ nonfiction techniques to fiction, you are able to focus what you're doing so much better. Um, and so that was kind of an early revelation for me too. Like the the sexy thing to study is narrative nonfiction, right? But I think that it works both ways. Like there's nonfiction that's been informed by creative writing. I think that creative writing should be informed by nonfiction writing too. I think the you end up with a you end up with fiction that is just clearer, more concise, and that thinks about the reader in a way that a lot of fiction that I read, I think, doesn't but should.
What do you think it was about nonfiction, a skill set that lent itself to a greater sense of focus and clarity? Was there something in particular that you could point to that really sort of unlocked something for you?
Wow. Sorry, let me think about that a minute.
Yeah, sure.
I I think I mean, clearly that, like, just reading, as I did in college, I read a ton of sort of the great 20th century writers of nonfiction, like Hershey and Agee. Those guys were all telling stories that you could compare to the greatest novels ever written, right? But they had this huge restraint on it, which that it had to be true, and but they were still
Right.
they were, it, and I think that for me, putting limits, putting those kind of restraints on it, just philosophically, just focuses you in a way that focuses your creative writing in a way that just makes it um, clearer. And it's what's there's an old Elmer Leonard line where he says when he oh gosh, I'm gonna blow it. I can't remember exactly what he says. Something like uh, writing for him is just taking out all the stuff he doesn't need, or something like that. And and
Yeah.
and I think I know he said it much better than that, but I think too much fiction has a lot of stuff in it you don't need, and nonfiction almost never great nonfiction almost never does. That when I read a novel that is as streamlined as like a John Hershey essay, that is when I'm like, oh, that is my favorite kind of fiction, the stuff that just has stripped away all the extraneous things and is just takes you on a bullet train from the beginning to end. Those are the novels that and the stories that I love to read.
Mm. So where where and when are you getting the writing bug? In your as you were coming up as a young person working for the Houston Astros and maybe even somewhat following in the footsteps of your father. When do you get this bug for story and a bug for writing?
In my family, my dad was a really good storyteller. I think when I was real little, telling stories was just the way in my house that you got attention, right? Because my
Hmm.
dad loved stories, and if you could come up with a good story to tell him, you would have, you could have everybody in the house would shut up and listen to you. And I think that initially was probably when I was drawn to it, and then eventually, obviously, when I was very young, I was a big reader, and I just love getting lost in a big book. And so, at some point, I knew, like, oh, I want to do for somebody else what Tolkien did for me. I remember, when my dad worked for the Pittsburgh Pirates in the '70s, and we would go to, I don't know, 50 or 60 games a year, and we would wait for him after the game. It would be like he'd have to work for like 2 hours after the game. I was like in third or fourth grade, and so we just sit in his office while he was running all over the stadium, setting up interviews with reporters and stuff and players. And he had a typewriter there, and so I would just put a piece of paper in the typewriter, and I would just write stories. Well, it was a way for me to pass the time, waiting for my dad to get off work at midnight or whenever it was. And that's really when I started writing. I never finished them because I would stop writing when he was ready to go. And I would throw whatever I was writing, I would throw away, and then the next time I would start. So I wrote 100 beginnings of first couple pages of stories sitting in his office. But that was really where I really just started to love the idea of writing.
Yeah, and it's great. Was there a moment like as you got older and then you figured that you might have to quote unquote like get a real job that pays real money and stuff, and you look back and be like, what, all along it was that thing I was doing at my dad's typewriter in the office. Like, was there that moment of revelation where it's like, yeah, why can't I do this right now?
Wow, I mean, I never. I still was always skeptical that I'd be able to write full time for a living until literally till I got the call that my novel had sold. Like you know what I mean? Like I always thought it was going to be a hobby. Um,
Yeah.
and that was just a life changing phone call. Um, So no, I didn't. That revelation didn't happen until after it had already happened. It was not uh, for me. It was never a thing like, oh, I'm gonna uh, write this novel and somebody's gonna pay me for it. I mean, obviously, in the back of my mind, that's what you hoped it to be published. But when I was writing it, that wasn't. I never felt, oh my gosh, if I can't get a publisher for this novel, I'm going to be crushed. Um, it was a thing I did because I enjoyed doing it, and it was fulfilling. And I had a story that really felt like I had to push it out of me, and so no, I would never say that being a full time professional writer was a dream, but it was never like a great ambition. I just didn't. I realized that the chances of it happening were slim, and if it didn't happen, I had a job at working at that ad agency. I had a job that I loved, and would have been perfectly happy to continue doing that and writing as a hobby. I would have had a very happy life that way, I think.
Yeah, and I guess that's maybe even like before that you knew that it was something you could do as a living writing novels. It was like sometimes there's I don't know, some sort of a moment where you realize that there's this thing that you just desperately need or want to do, and sometimes people just get bogged down by work, by life, by extenuating circumstances, and then they just fail to prioritize whether it's painting or writing songs or in your case novels that at some point you just realize like, oh, when I was a kid there was that thing I just loved to do for the sake of doing it. And it seems like at some point or another you did pick up, maybe you just continually wrote, but it just feels like it was something that you found and you were going to do no matter what, and it just so happens you were able to parlay it into something more permanent and sustaining it, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And even like the last 10 years or so, I've sort of gone from I've been working on a couple of novels in the background, but I've gone from sort of project to project. I wrote for a TV show for a while. Uh, I wrote a Drive to the Gap. I wrote a movie that came out last year, and
What movie?
eventually, the movie's called Chasing the Blues. It's an indie
Hmm.
film. Came out. I guess it's year before last is when it was actually released now. But it has John Lovitz, Grant Rosenmeyer, who was he was Ari Tenenbaum in the Royal Tenenbaums. One of the kids in the tracksuits.
Oh, nice.
He's,
Nice.
he's
It's
he's
one of my
obviously not a kid.
favorite movies.
Oh yeah, he's a great actor too. He's great in this movie. He's not a kid anymore, obviously. But it's a movie about. It's based on an old short story of mine, and it is this. It's about a pair of rival record collectors in the '80s, right at the time when CDs are coming out and LPs are kind of fading, and they basically simultaneously discover a mythically rare blues record from the '30s in this old woman's apartment on the south side of Chicago, and they both sort of end up in this apartment. They neither one of them will leave because they know that the other one will take it. And the woman is she's a little uh, she's got a little bit of dementia, and so she just sort of she's happy to have the company, so she just keeps feeding them and letting them stay in her apartment. And the record is also alleged to be cursed. It's supposed allegedly nobody's ever heard it, but it allegedly has the screams of a woman being murdered on it. And so anyway, they so half the movie is this the two of them in this apartment trying to take this record from each other, and the other half takes place in the present when they get out of prison for what happened uh, in that apartment eventually. Um, and I was really pleased with it. It came out great. It was a Chicago director. It was his first feature film, and I was really really pleased with the way it came out. You can find it on demand and Amazon, I think, and places like that.
So, with respect to a drive into the gap, how do you like how long was this story sort of percolating in your head as you were sort of conceiving of the story and taking on this project?
Well, as I said before, I used to work for the company that became Field Notes, and I'm still great friends with everybody there. Jim Kudal, who is the president of that company, is one of my best friends, and I would continue to occasionally do work for them. If they had a little project or something need to be written, Jim would call me up, and I would help him out with little things here and there. And so one day he called me and he said, um, "We are going to do a baseball edition of Field Notes." And he said, when you were here in the office, you used to tell all these baseball stories all the time. Stories from my dad had been a baseball executive for 35 years with the Yankees and the Pirates in the Baseball Hall of Fame. I worked for the Pirates and the Houston Astros over the course of 3 seasons. And I just had a lot of baseball stories that I was always sort of, throwing around in the office. And his idea was to just have a little an additional field notes memo book sized book that just had a bunch of these stories in it. And I said, yeah, sure, I can do that. And then he said, but you have to tell the story about Roberto Clemente's bat. And so this was a story that didn't have an ending. It was a story about a baseball bat that had been Roberto Clemente's that hung in my childhood bedroom for the entire time I was growing up. And then sometime in the 90s, a gentleman named Tony Bartero, who had been trainer for the Pirates, stopped by. It was a good friend of my dad's. Tony was retired. My dad was now in Cooperstown at the Baseball Hall of Fame. And he came to visit my parents in Cooperstown. And on the way to the bathroom, he saw this bat. And he came back, carried it back into the living room, and he showed it to my father. He said, "Bill, where did you get this bat?" And my father went through the story of how he got it. And Tony said, "No, this is the bat Roberto Clemente used to get his 3,000th and final hit." And this was a huge shock to my father because he had been the public relations director of the Pirates when Clemente got the hit. He was the one who got the bat from Clemente, a Louisville Slugger, that he sent to the Hall of Fame, the bat that's in the Hall of Fame as we speak. And to be told that there's another bat that he owns that might be the actual bat that Clemente used to get his 3,000th hit. This would be like a major memorabilia scandal in baseball. So I knew that, and all I knew was that my father said he looked into it and he didn't think it was true. So that was the, and I honestly I didn't even question him very much about it. I just figured they had gotten a photographer, so they figured it out, and it wasn't true. So, but I told that story in the office, and Jim said, "All right, you just with all these other stories you're going to tell, you got to tell that story." But then I was like, well, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it really has an ending because I don't know how my dad figured that out, and I don't. And he at this point had Alzheimer's related dementia, and I couldn't follow up with him and figure it out. So I said, I guess I've got to now try to recreate what he did and find out if this story could be true. That became the entire book. Was this journey of me trying to figure out, is it possible that this bat that was in my bedroom as a child was actually the bat Roberto Clemente used for his 3,000th hit?
And
So,
I suspect too, like that's kind of the narrative thrust of it is like trying to solve the mystery or this unsolvable mystery of the bat. But of course, there's the thread that goes through it about you and your father, and and the caulk of Alzheimer's that you talked about, sort of filling itself in the synapses, which I thought was just like a beautiful way of in a evocative way of putting that.
Well, thank you. And I mean, and the crazy thing about what happened was that when I started looking into it, I started to think oh my gosh, it might be true. When I tracked down Tony Barterom, and he told me why the story about why he believed that was the bat, and it was entirely convincing. It was completely convincing. And then when I talked to other people who were in the dugout who believed the same thing, I you know I wasn't sure what to think anymore, and so that really drove the investigation even further because I just taken my father's word for it that they had already solved this mystery, and when I started pulling at the thread, I wasn't sure they had it all.
You say that you had a life in proximity to baseball, and and so much of this, it's great how you spackle in all these different kind of stories, but we're all going in so essentially one direction. What did being in the proximity to baseball mean to you, and even playing a lot of your pony league and probably in your games on Doubleday Field, at that beautiful field in Cooperstown?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it
Uh-oh.
was.
All
When
agree.
you look at
Yeah.
the time, of course. Yeah. At the time when I was a kid, I just didn't know any different, right? Like, we would.
Yeah.
My entire family, and I was like in elementary school. Our entire family would move to Florida for 2 months, and I would go to school down there. We would just pack up in at the end of February and move to Bradenton. And we run a house on like Anna Maria Island, and so for 2 months I lived in Florida. I had a different set of friends down there. I went to school with them, hung out at spring training all weekend, every weekend. I would go to 50 or 60 Pirates games every summer. It was just that, looking back, it was an incredible childhood. It was just an absolutely idyllic, way to live. And then we moved to Cooperstown, which is, one time when I was working in, I think for either the Pirates or the Astros, I was in a press box and somebody introduced me to a reporter. This guy's a baseball writer, and so he said, "Hey, Kevin grew up in Cooperstown," and this reporter looked at me and he said, "My God," he said, "until this moment, it never even occurred to me that people lived there." Right?
Yeah.
Like Cooperstown was like a Disney World or something. Like it was a theme, like it was a myth, it was just a mythical place, right? Where baseball was allegedly invented. But in a lot of ways it's the strangest, most wonderful town. Like it's just the people there are nuts, and baseball it's this sort of a company town for baseball. But it's also got this rich literary history. It's where James Fenimore Cooper lived. That the town was actually named after his father. Uh, it's a really super weird place, like out of a movie or something. And you know, we lived there. I grew up there as a kid. And at the time, you're just like, oh, I can't wait to get out of this place. Like everybody, other kid who just wants to grow up and be an adult and be out on his own. But I look back on it now.
Right.
It's like, wow, that was the greatest childhood I couldn't have fashioned. I could have made up a better childhood for myself. It was the best. It was the best.
Yeah, I love the point. Like, you were, of course, on teams that weren't very good, but a lot of teams bust in to
Yeah.
play at Doubleday Field, and you wrote in the piece, winning stopped being the point for us. It was about playing as much as you could every day that you could. And I love that sentiment. I think that applies to so much. That can apply to writing. There are certain things that are out of your control, but as long as you enjoy the playing or the writing, then and you can do it again and again, like, that's really its own victory.
Yeah, absolutely. Now Cooperstown has it's called the Dreams Park. It's a place where little league, you know, uh, teams from all over the country every summer come and they play these tournaments every week. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of kids, do it every year. When I was growing up, the team wanted to come to Cooperstown. They would just book a say they want to go play a game on Doubleday Field, and if there's nobody else for them to play, they would just play us. We just get 9 kids together, and and run out there and play them. Between, I mean, Pony League and American Legion and high school and those games, I don't know. I couldn't even tell you how many games I played on Doubleday Field. Hundreds, 200. I don't even know. I mean, we played almost every day in the summer,
Huh.
and it's gorgeous, field like manicured like a professional baseball diamond. It's 10,000 seats, and just to be able to, as a kid, to play in a park like that every single day is a dream. It's an absolute dream.
What position did you play?
I played second base.
Nice.
Yeah, I didn't have the arm to make the throw from the other side of the diamond, but I could
Right.
knock the ball down okay.
Right. So, primarily as a novelist, what was the challenge for you, if any, of writing something that was, of course, rooted in in something true, so a true story, a verifiably true story? Like, what was that challenge for you? Pivoting genre, so to speak.
Yeah, I didn't think that much about it. In terms of how different it was, the journalism aspect of it was obviously different. Like the interviews and there are a lot. Suddenly, there's a lot of people involved besides me, and also the story had to be what the story was, not what I wanted it to be, which is just the temptation you have as a novelist. I think is to sort of when you start, kind of outline where you're going, and maybe you don't end up exactly there, but you always have a destination that you think you're writing toward. At least I do. And this was very different. I would find out a new piece of information. It would take you to a completely different direction. So writing something that I had absolutely no idea how it was going to end. That I guess that uh, was the big difference. But the writing part of it, like I said, I've been influenced by a lot of nonfiction writers. My formal education as a writer was all in nonfiction. So that part I I felt came really naturally. It was the becoming a journalist thing that was really new. Um,
Yeah, the I love how you were able to create tension in this piece as well, like with the while you're on the hunt for the identity of this bat, is it the slugger, the Adirondack, or whatever it is, you're able to track down footage from this like rogue photographer who goes in with his two kids and actually calling says he spoke to your dad, and he's in the dugout taking you know shooting footage of this.
absolutely,
It's just
absolutely.
like
Again, yeah, an
crazy.
absolutely crazy story. Like better and wilder than I could have made up is the discovery of this 40-year-old 8 millimeter Super 8 film that nobody had watched, and it was just been sitting in this guy's closet since 1973 or 1972. It's insane, absolutely insane.
Yeah, and I love too that you write. Most novelists write fiction to create order out of chaos, and then you go on to say the nonfiction writer often does the opposite. He starts with the assumption that the true story he wants to tell conforms to a logical narrative. Instead, he discovers that there are always motivations that are incomprehensible, that people act irrationally, that memories are imperfect. The nonfiction writer uncovers the chaos hidden beneath the orderly surface. I was like, I love that. It was such a great passage.
Oh well, thank you. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's that. I guess that's the answer to your question earlier. That is the frustration of the novelist writing nonfiction, is that you can't tie up every loose end, and there are a lot of things that are just unknowable. That is the biggest frustration, is all of these unknowable things that you you want to resolve, but you just can't.
And the best part is the following sentence after that is, I decided to write another novel.
Yeah, that's true. After that, that's right.
And yeah, so and at what point do you know that when you're writing this thing, that it's not just this mystery of the bat, but that you are also going to tie in your relationship to your father, and then his slow, sort of succumbing to Alzheimer's throughout this whole story as well.
Right. Well, that was the thing that was going on when I was writing it. That was sort of preoccupying my thoughts and my emotions, it just seemed natural that it didn't make any sense to ignore that. That that was sort of the primary thing I was feeling at the time that I was writing. And since my dad was a part of the story, it kind of made sense to pour all that stuff into it as well.
And
There are all the things that this story could be over really quickly if I could just ask him. And
yeah,
he's alive and he's there, and I can sit in a room with him, and I, he can't answer. You can't ask him the question. You can't, and so that was the sort of sense of frustration that I think just sort of permeates the mystery and the search throughout the book.
yeah, and you write so like poignantly about the unrelenting present, as you put it. To your father at the time, you were a 40-year-old father, and also a at age, you were at Notre Dame and so forth. It was like you were everything at once, whereas like your mother, of course, could you know sequentially put you in the right order. So it was like that must have been just incredibly hard to witness.
Yeah, it's. I mean, anybody who's been through that with a relative, it's just the hardest thing to see someone because they're there, and you can even see some of their personality. It's not like they're completely gone, but they just can't make sense of anything, and so they just live in this sort of. My dad just lived in this constant state of frustration and bewilderment, and especially around that time when I was writing this book, he knew that something he knew it wasn't like he was sort of blissfully ignorant. He knew that this wasn't right, and but he didn't know what it was, you know and and he just constantly anxious and frustrated, and it's really hard to watch somebody you love go through that. It's just
Mm,
really, really painful.
right, right. Do you see yourself writing more, baseball stories and nonfiction of this nature, or is that something you feel like uh, still have the itch to do?
I don't know. I might on some level, especially something short. I tend the big projects. If I'm going to undertake a project that is going to take a substantial amount of time, I prefer to write. People say that there's the old adage about writing what you know, but I much prefer to write about things I'm curious about, and and by definition don't know all that much about it. My preference is to write about something I'm learning about. So I love baseball. I don't have a burning desire to write a lot about it. This story was a little bit different because it was really a story about. It wasn't just a story about baseball. It was a story about my dad. It was it was. I think at some point in there, I say it's a story about stories. It's a story about memory. It was all, but and those things were really captivating to me. But as much as I love baseball and I miss baseball, I don't feel a huge urge to write about baseball just for the sake of it.
Mm. Yeah, and maybe you can tell a little story about having to court Barry Bonds to
Oh my
sign
god.
sign material sign material.
Oh gosh. So I was an intern with the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1989, and Barry Bonds was on that team. He was a much different player than I think most people remember. He was. I can't remember how many years he'd been in the league, but he was still like you could like a promising future star. And I think the year I was there, I think he hit about 240 something, and he stole a bunch of bases and he hit quite a few home runs, but he wasn't like you know a big an all star yet. But everybody had their eye on him. They knew he was going to be a great player, and so my job, because I was like literally the lowest employee in the entire building. And so I got all the jobs nobody else wanted to do. And one of them was the community services department would put together a list of requests, most of them from kids who were in the hospital, like terminally ill children. And then mixed in there would be like, the owner of the team, had wanted to give an autograph to somebody, a friend of his or something. So, it was that sort of mix of things, but there usually weren't that many. It was like, I never brought more than 3 or 4 for any one player and on any given day, because they got other things to do. And they were most of the time the players would see me come in the clubhouse with the stack of 8x10 glossy photos and a Sharpie, and they would kind of roll their eyes. But most people had a good. Everybody else in that clubhouse really treated me well and were really nice about it, and they understood it was part of their job. But Barry just never. He just absolutely didn't want to do it, and I think I even say in the book, I began to understand at some point. I think he thought in the back of his mind that whatever he gave you like, if I asked him to sign 3 pictures today and he did it, I would come back with 20 tomorrow. So I think I think that was his attitude, was just like, I'm just going to just not do it, even though not doing it was a huge pain. Like, because I would just sit there and stare at him in the clubhouse, and he would get mad. But I have a job to do. They're gonna just send me back down here if I don't get this autograph, and I'm gonna get yelled at if I can't make you do this. And so he would just make up stories about, he'd accuse me of taking these pictures and selling his autograph and stuff, which is insane, because they all say like "to Jimmy" on them. Like, there's no memorabilia market for personalized, photos or anything. And so it would be on a home game. It would be a huge chunk of my day, a couple of hours, just stalking him in the clubhouse every day. And eventually I did figure out that the only way I could get him to do it is that the only person whose opinion mattered to him was the manager, Jim Leland. And he also knew that Leland wouldn't, if Leland saw him giving me a hard time, he wouldn't put up with it. And so my job was just basically to wait until Leland walked through the room, and then I would run up to Barry and I'd say really loud, "Barry, I need you to sign these photos." and he, as soon as he saw Leland, he would just, I got it. He knew he couldn't say no. But that was I spent my whole summer was like 40% of that job was trying to get Barry Bonds to sign 3 pictures for sick kids. Like, it was the worst. It was the worst. And having him berate me and accuse me of all kinds of things in between.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well,
Yeah.
so just a couple things, Kevin. Be mindful of your time, of course. When you're writing novels, or even thinking about, or when you were writing Drive into the Gap or or anything for that matter, where do you feel most alive and most engaged in the process of creating something?
There are just times, it's not always like this. Writing is 95% of it is a grind, right? It's just it's just hard work like anything else. But there are times when you have a scene and a story and a character in you that and the only way to make it real is to get those words out on a page. And there are times when you feel that urge to take this part of your imagination and make it real. That is thrilling, really, really thrilling. And I think every writer writes because they put up with everything else just to experience those moments, and they don't even last long. It's not even like a full day of writing. It's like, it might be like an hour where you are just can't get the words out of you fast enough, and there's a great satisfaction in making this this platonic thing in your head become an actual thing on the page. That for me is the whole ball game. That's when it gets good.
Fantastic. Well, Kevin, where can people find you online and get a little more familiar with your work, if they're not already familiar with it?
You know what? Currently, I would say the best place to go just to go to the search up field notes and a drive into the Gap, and look up that page. You'll get a good sense of that book. I actually just read this is publishing weeds, but I actually just clawed back the rights to my first two novels, so
Cool.
they are it's great, but currently they might be as we're having this conversation, they might be hard to find. I'm sure you can find them used someplace. Those books are Cast of Shadows and The Thousand are my two novels. Chasing the Blues on demand somewhere on your television set. I think it's on Prime somewhere. But yeah, if you're curious at all, I would go search out A Drive Into the Gap.
To quote Mel Allen, how about that? That was fun. Thanks to Kevin for the time and for my kick-ass editing and coaching service for sponsoring the show, along with Casualty of Words, the writing podcast for people in a hurry. Go subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, and if you dig the show, either one, this one especially, and Casualty of Words, consider sharing it. Give digital fist bumps. Consider leaving reviews. Those all help. If you want. If not, whatever. Follow the show. Keep the conversation going at CNF Pod. Sign up for the newsletter at BrendanO'Mara.com. I think that's about it. I know it's amazing. I'm sorry about the audio there. And you think, because really, all I do is interview. And I couldn't get my own damn audio right. So I almost feel like I can't even say my catchphrase here, because I truly messed up. But in any case, if you can't do interview, see ya.